I've tried a lot of knitting tools over the years. Some were exciting for 5 minutes, some useful for a while, and some quietly disappeared into a drawer. Today I want to show you the tools that didn't disappear, the ones I actually use, reach for, and trust every time I knit. So get comfy, grab a cup of something warm, and let's talk knitting tools. Hi there and welcome to today's video. My name's Luisa, but everybody calls me Lu. And here on the channel I talk about all things knitting, from what's currently on my needles to patterns that are inspiring me, future plans, and today, knitting tools. A while back I made a video all about the tools I regretted buying, so today we are flipping the script a bit to talk about tools that earned a permanent place in my knitting, and a couple that held a spot for a long time and only recently stepped aside. I have a basket full of things to go through today in no particular order. I'll just pick things up as I go. But before we start, just one important note. Everything I'm sharing today is based entirely on my knitting journey and the way I knit. These are my opinions and my opinions only. I'm not saying you have to agree, and honestly, if we all loved the same knitting tools, life would be pretty boring. These are simply the tools that earned a permanent place in my knitting. Some are exciting, some are very boring, and some are complicated, but they all stayed, and that's what matters today. And I think it's about time to start going through this basket. So the first thing that is catching my eye right now are my knitting needles. Every knitter has their favorite, and this is my favorite knitting needles. What I have here inside this case is my Chalgu set. I have the red lace Chalgu stainless steel. They run with the red cable, everybody knows them. And I didn't buy the set. Let me show you the needles first because it makes more sense, right? I don't have an entire set. In fact, I just have one pair of each size, and I don't even have all sizes. But it works for me. I want to expand my needle collection at one point, but for now this works for me, so it's fine. As I was saying, I don't have a set. I bought each needle separately because it took me such a long time to find needles I actually enjoyed knitting with, that when I bought my first pair of Chalgus, in the back of my mind I was thinking, someday something is gonna happen and I'm going to realize I don't enjoy knitting with these Chalgu needles. So future me will be glad I didn't commit to an entire set. And here I am, 10 needle sizes later, still very much in love with my Chalgus. But like I was saying, I really love them, and I even have the blue shorties set, the 5 and 8 centimeters tips, I think. This little guy here, I don't knit with this because I can't make them work for the life of me, but I refuse to give up on them because I won't be defeated by 2 sticks of metal. So I will make them work someday, somehow, and until the day comes, they're going to live in my needles case. So yeah, this is what I have. Those are my knitting needles. In fact, there are a couple of things from Chalgu that I want to try out pretty soon, I hope. I've just seen, I think yesterday, a few yarn stores have been teasing the new swivel adapters from Chalgu, and I'm really excited to try them out. And this is supposed to, well, make your cables swivel. It's still not available in my go-to yarn shop online, so hopefully pretty soon I'm going to get my hands on these adapters. But enough about the needles. Every knitter has their favorite knitting needles, so let's jump to another tool I always use, and let's go with this little guy here. I've been calling this a stitch fixer. I don't know if this is the right name for it or not, but it's basically a crochet hook on both sides. The one I have here is from Coco Knits, and this is a 3mm hook. I got my hands on this when I was working on a show a few years ago, and I was working with unplied yarn. I don't know if unplied yarn is the right way to call the yarn I was working with at the time. It's that kind of yarn where the plies are next to each other instead of in a twist. So I was working with, let's say, unplied yarn. It was a garter stitch show, and at some point I dropped one of the plies, and I only realized that 40 something rows later. So I got this little guy to help me out. Since it was a garter stitch show, it was pretty important to have a crochet hook, and now I almost knocked it out, to have a crochet hook on both sides. Like I said, this is from Coco Knit, but there are many out there, different sizes, different colors and lengths. I like to use this not only for fixing mistakes when I need to go backwards, but also to tidy up loose stitches when I mess with my tension sometimes, or to weave in some ends. I also like to use this. Now let's go to something more, well, personal also, which is stitch markers. I think this varies a lot from knitter to knitter, but for a long time, if you asked me what kind of stitch marker do I like the most, I would have answered the light bulb ones. This little guy here. Why? Because it kind of works, but boy, I don't like them. I think these stitch markers are terrible because let me get a needle tip so I can show you what I mean. They are supposed to stay on the needles like this. And now I can't find it anymore. Let me get another one. They are supposed to stay on the needle. Really? Okay. They are supposed to stay on the needles like this. Right? Yeah. But what happens with me is my stitch marker doesn't like to stay like this. Here. Wait. Like this. It likes to stay this way. Upside down. So what happens is where the opening is, the side here is much narrower than the round side. So when it sticks to the needle like this, it usually gets stuck on the needles. Depending on the needle size I'm using, it in fact gets stuck, and I have to stop everything and use both hands to remove, let's say, the stitch marker. And because this side is also narrower, I'm always worried this thing is going to scratch my needles and damage them somehow. So I really don't like these light bulb stitch markers. Sometimes they get in the way. It's terrible. I don't like them. A few months ago, my mom gifted me this set of stitch markers. This is the Flight of Stitch Markers by Coco Knits. And this set is cool because it comes with 5 different kinds of stitch markers. You have 3 sizes for a ring stitch marker, I think it's the right name, a triangle shape, and the split ring. If we talk about the split ring first, let me get it here. This is pretty cute, this stitch marker. They look like this. They are pretty popular around the knitting community. What I like about them is they're cute. They're easy to attach to the fabric using just one hand. But when I'm knitting in the round, which is basically 99% of the time, and working on sweaters, which is my preferred type of project, I stick this thing to the fabric and then I start moving things around as I'm knitting. At one point, I spot my stitch marker on the floor. This always happens, and what's the point of using a stitch marker if it prefers to stay on the floor instead of attached to your fabric? So yeah, I don't really use them. I can't really make them work. They're this little guy here. The triangle shape also gets in the way pretty often, so I don't really reach for them either. What I like about this set is the small size of ring markers. Let me get one. I use these stitch markers all the time in all my projects. There are two sizes that I reach for the most. This really small one and the medium size, I think, depending on the needle size I'm using. I reach for this one. They're also pretty cute. I think they're metal inside with this colorful coating on the outside. I don't know what the coating is, but they work just fine. I love the stitch markers. They've been my favorite stitch markers for a while now. Would I buy this set again? I don't think I would, because I only reach for, well, less than half of the stitch markers that came in this set. But if I lost any of the two sizes of ring stitch markers that I always use, I would 100% buy them again. If I need a removable stitch marker, I still reach for my light bulb ones, but if any kind of stitch marker works, I'm certainly reaching for the ring ones. And I think it's time for something a little different now, so let's talk about my yarn dispenser. I don't know if that's the right name for this thing, but I call this my yarn dispenser. This is a wooden base with a swivel function and this little stick on top of it. The way this thing works is you attach a yarn ball, a yarn cake. Let's assume this is a ball of yarn, and then it feeds your yarn as you are knitting. I really like this because I usually knit around the house. I'm not really a knit on the go person, so this thing is really handy for me. There are many of these out there. What I have here is from Knit Pro, and like I said, this is made out of wood, but there are also plastic and acrylic ones. There's this cute kind with a bracelet attachment for knitters who like to knit and walk at the same time. I can't do that. There's also a magnetic one, which is basically this thing upside down, and there's a magnetic joint here and a arm to make it stand nicely on a table. I'm not really a fan of that kind of yarn dispenser because the size of your cake of yarn has some limitations. You can only fit something that is as big as this little gap you have between this stick and the arm of the yarn dispenser. So that's why I really like this one. I can wind 2 or 3 skeins in a single cake of yarn and just pop it right here. No limits. My cake is free to be as big as I want it to. I use this every time I knit because I like to pull from the outside instead of the inside of a yarn cake. So if I pull from the outside without this thing, my yarn ball rolls around my desk, falls on the floor. It's a whole mess. So this thing is really handy, but enough about it. Let's talk about something else, and let's go with needle stoppers. I had a needle tip here to help me, but here I call these needle stoppers, but I don't know if that's another way to call this guy. This little silicone rubber, I don't know the material, to protect the tip of your needles. I just have 2 different kinds. I have this cute little tulip one in a few different colors, and I also have this, I don't know what this is, maybe a bow or something. I got this at Grene, which is a pretty famous chain store here around Europe, and the orange one is from Tulip. People like to use this to prevent the stitches from falling right off the needles and start unraveling themselves. I always use this when I put a project down, but not because of this reason. I like to knit with metal baskets as project bags. I don't really have project bags. I have many of these baskets around my house to hold my projects, and if I don't use a needle stopper, my needle tip can poke through the mesh here of my basket And this is a recipe for disaster, right? Someday a needle tip is going to break because of the mesh of my basket. So to prevent that from happening, I always stick a needle stopper to the tip of my needles every time I put a project down. There are very cute and fancy ones out there. I just have this really basic one from Tulip and my recent acquisition, this one from Zusenegrene, and I'm fine with it. I always use them and they are really handy. I know some people like to use them just for the cuteness factor it adds to their knitting, and I really get that because it is also pretty cute. And I won't lie, this is well, a huge factor of why I like them also. Now let's go with something a little controversial, and it's time to talk about my try it on tubing. If you've been here a while, you know my love-hate relationship with this tubing. This thing is terrible. I cursed the day this tubing was born, but I reach for it all the time, almost on a daily basis. The concept is genius, but this one is terrible. So the way people usually use them is to stick at the end of their needle tip to slide the stitches right into the tubing. It should be just fine, it should work, but mine doesn't stick to the end of my needle tip. So it's a whole mess. My stitches fly right off, I lose my stitches, so then I have to pick them up before they start unraveling themselves. It's a whole thing. I absolutely don't like my tubing. But like I was saying, the concept is genius. I like to use this thing when I am blocking my knits. I don't really use it for trying on because I prefer to just attach a spare cable from my Chalgu set, and that way I can try it on just as well. I don't really need try it on tubing for that, in my opinion. But when I'm blocking my projects, especially when I'm doing mid project blocks, which I do all the time also, I prefer to use this try it on tubing. I would love if I could just submerge my red lace cables underwater, but I'm not really confident that would work, especially over time. I think I could damage the cables. Try it on tubing. It is, at least for now. I really need to upgrade the ones I have, but so far, this is what I have. I make them work somehow. Some people like to use lifeline, some people like to use embroidery thread. I think they are too much work when I'm done blocking and I have to put my stitches back on the needles because I have to do it stitch by stitch if I use a lifeline or embroidery thread. So that's why I still reach for this try it on tubing. Like I said, I need to upgrade them. They are pretty famous ones on Amazon, but I've seen many people complaining about the smell. Some people say there's no smell, some people say the smell is pretty bad. Many knitting shops sell what I think it's called barber cord, or maybe that's a brand, I don't really know. But they are so expensive for what I get, so I don't really want to buy that. Really don't like it, but they are pretty handy and I reach for them all the time. And the next thing is something that was downgraded a few weeks ago. I'm talking about my maker's board by Coco Knits. Until recently, I found it really handy for following charts. Now, not anymore, because the way this thing works is you prop it open on a flat surface like this, so it stays just like a tablet, let's say, and this thing comes with magnetic sheets on each side. Let me see if I can show you this. Here, can you see? There's one on each side of this folder, let's say. And now it's going to be really tricky to put it back in. There you go. And this maker's board also comes with magnets to hold your chart in place. I bought separately these two rulers to help me follow the charts. The reason why I don't use this anymore is because this takes up too much space on my desk, and I'm always worried that if by any chance I knock this ruler out of the way, then I lose track of where I was in a chart. So I used to always write down the row I was when I put my project down. better safe than sorry, right? So if I'm writing down the row, am I really using this? I don't really see the point. So recently I saw Kotova Kika's gift box on Instagram, and she mentioned washi tapes for following charts. I think this is pretty self explanatory, but it never crossed my mind to use washi tapes for following charts. And I really liked that idea, especially because I have an entire pouch full of washi tapes. No idea why, because I've never bought a single one, but someone gifted an entire bag of washi tapes to me like 5 years ago, and they've been collecting dust in a drawer ever since. I felt like I was going to need 3 lifetimes to use all this up, but now that I found a useful way to use them up, well, I think only a lifetime is enough to go through my stash of washi tapes. What I really like about them is they take up zero space in a knitting notions pouch, and they are cheap. They're way cheaper than a maker's board. So yeah, I really like to print out my patterns. I need the physical copy. I need something to hold to keep me company when I'm knitting. So I really like using washi tapes or following charts. I know some people like to use apps like Knit Companion. There are many apps out there for following charts. I don't really like that. I like the physical copy, like I said. So washi tape is my preferred way to safely follow a chart. Now, enough about that, and let's talk about blocking mats. I think this is kind of controversial because some people say blocking mats are really necessary. Some people say you don't need them. You just lay your knits on top of a towel and it works just as well. I like using blocking mats because I do a lot of mid project blocks, so they are really handy for me. The ones I have is this set from Coco Knit that I got over on Amazon. Each set comes with nine mats, and I have two of these sets. Especially if it's a garment, I do at least one or two mid project blocks and then a final block when the project is done. So I reach for them all the time. I like these ones specifically because let me get one. They are extra thick. The ones I had previously were a little bit thinner, so I always poked myself. I don't actually use T-pins for blocking. I like to use sewing pins. So with a extra thick mat, it's really more sturdy and more manageable to bring my knits from the floor to the top of my desk if I want to measure something. Sometimes I like to put it under the sun. I know some people might say this is a terrible habit, but it works for me. So sometimes I do it when it's summer. Anyway, blocking mats, there's also the grid. This grid is 1 by 1 inch, so not really useful for me because my brain only works in the metric system, but it's still really useful to get straight lines, to see if both sleeves have the same length and things like that. Like you saw, when I got this set, it came in this plastic bag thing. There was also a canvas bag option, but at the time I purchased this, the canvas bag cost more than double the price of this one. I couldn't really justify spending 90 euros in a set of blocking mats, so I got this one with the plastic bag, and I think a month later the canvas bag was costing the same as this one, so thank you so much. I could have avoided plastic, and now I am stuck with two giant plastic bags. Yeah, not really ideal, but that's life. One day, if I have to replace them, I will get the canvas back. And let's talk about a gauge ruler. At least I call this a gauge ruler. I don't know if there's another name for this. This is just a 10 by 10 square frame. I'm one of those knitters who swatches for their projects. That's only true if it's a garment or if it's a project that getting gauged is really important. Otherwise, I don't really swatch. I don't like swatching one bit, but I find it really important and useful to help guide me through the first few days of a new project. I also talked about the way I like to approach swatches and start a new project. In my step-by-step video, I have a video here on the channel where I shared my step-by-step process to translating the fit I have in mind to the project on my needles. It will be linked here and also down below in the description. But this is a gauge ruler. There are many out there. The one I have is from Eddie. This is a plastic one. I was gifted this one time when I got yarn from a certain yarn shop. I don't even remember the name of the yarn shop. But like I was saying, there are many out there made from wood, plastic, acrylic. I don't really like using a tape measure to measure my gauge because I always lose count. I either count beyond 10 centimeters, or when I look down to see if I'm getting close to 10 centimeters, I lose count. So it's a whole thing. Could I use markers or pins to select 10 centimeter and count? Sure. Do I? Of course not. So gauge ruler to the rescue. I use this thing all the time when I'm starting a new project, and this has a permanent place in my knitting notions pouch. Now, I said I was going to talk about the purple case when I showed you guys my stitch markers, so let's talk about it now. This isn't really a tool, but it makes my life so much easier. It keeps everything tidy and organized, so I think this little guy deserves a spot in today's lineup. This is a Pios case I got over on Amazon a couple of years ago. I don't think they sell this same one anymore. But what I really like about this specific one is the compartment here. All compartments are pretty bigger than a regular Pios case. So I can fit all my stitch markers into each of these little compartments. I'm not going to show you very close because of the glare from the window. You wouldn't be able to see, but I think you can get an idea of how this looks from here. So this has a magnetic closure, so pretty easy to open and close with just one hand. I really like this, like I was saying, because I can fit all my stitch markers inside this thing. With a regular Pios case with smaller compartments, I could only fit a couple of stitch markers, and then I had to find another solution for the rest of my stitch markers, so it doesn't really work for me. I have one for my stitch markers, one for little bits and bobs, and a third one for all my knitting needles, accessories like end caps, tightening keys, the little rubber grippy thing to help tighten the cables. So I really like them, they're really handy. If I lost them or if I damaged them somehow, I would want to buy the same one again, but like I said, they are not really available, so I'm just hoping I never lose them. So now let's go to another thing that is, I think you can call this a tool. I am talking about a scale. I am one of those knitters who likes to control as much of their knitting as possible. I don't like to live on the edge, so I'm always reaching for a scale. I like to weigh every new ball of yarn I break into for future reference in case I need that information. If I'm playing yarn chicken, I have a high tendency of thinking I'm playing yarn chicken. So with a scale, I know how much yarn I need for one sleeve. That way I know if I have enough for the second one. I always weight my leftovers to help me plan future projects. My scale isn't really ideal, I would say. When I bought this, I had another purpose in mind, so it only goes to 500 grams. If I'm just weighing one ball of yarn, it's fine, but if I'm trying to weigh multiple skeins, this weight limitation is kind of hard to get around. It also makes it difficult to put a bowl on top, a kitchen bowl on top, to have a bigger surface where I can put my yarn in. That's also another problem because this plate is kind of small. If I'm trying to weigh a skein, I need a lightweight bowl on top, but there's the weight limitation. So yeah, this scale is sometimes more like a pain than a helper, but it gets the job done. I just have to be creative when I use it. I'm kind of hoping my scale will stop working at some point soon so I can justify buying a new one, but for now this is the scale I have. Now another thing I always reach for is a lint remover. Some knits require some tough love after they are done, and that's where a lint remover comes in handy. The one I have here is from Gaia Top. I don't really know how to pronounce that, but it's this little guy. And oh, and I just turned it on. Sorry. But the little dispenser here is full, so I have to take care of that later today. But I really like this one I got. It was recommended by a knitting channel I like to watch here on YouTube, String Things by Mel. I really like her podcast. She has a very calm energy that I really appreciate. One day she recommended this lint remover, and I also really like it. It has three different speed options, works pretty well. I really like it. Never had a problem using it on my finished objects, although a pajama top of mine might not agree with that. That thing feels like nobody's business. So I have a deep peeling appointment with my pajama top every month, I think. And I've already made 4 holes in it. But I don't think the lint remover is to blame because I only had a problem with that specific piece of clothing, so I think it's more like a garment issue than a lint remover issue. I've used it many times with my finished objects and I never had a problem with it, so I trust this thing a lot. I've been thinking about getting that comb kind of lint remover, the one you just comb your knits to remove the lint, but I think that might be too much work or maybe more time than I'm willing to spend deep peeling a sweater. But anyway, this is the one I have. I really like it. I know some knitters find this process unsufferable, but I actually really like it. I find it really therapeutic. So yeah, I really like it and I would 100% buy this again. Now let's go with something a little bit basic, I would say, and let's talk about cable needles. If I'm knitting cables, my go-to is this spiral cable needle. This one I got over on Hobby a couple of years ago. I don't know if they sell this anymore, but I would guess they do. The set came with 3 cable needles. I don't really know why, because they are all the same thickness. They're just different colors, so don't really know the point of that. But anyway, I like to knit without a cable needle if it's possible, depending on the yarn I'm using and how many stitches I'm trying to cross. But if I need a cable needle, this is the one I reach for. I like to have as much control of my knitting as I possibly can, like I just mentioned. So sometimes I'm not willing to risk cabling without a cable needle in case I drop one strand if I'm knitting with mohair and things like that. So this is my go-to if I need a cable needle, like I said. What I like about this one is there's no risk of the stitches falling on the other side of the cable needle because of this spiral shape. And I also like to use this if I am tidying up the tension on some loose stitches or if I just need to stretch one stitch for some reason. So yeah, this thing is really handy and it lives in my knitting notions pouch. The next thing, and we are getting to the end of the list, the next thing is also pretty basic. I don't think there's anything new about this. This is a tape measure and this is a pretty standard one at that. This is just plastic with a retractable function. So you just press this little button and it retracts. Since my brain works in the metric system, I like to have measuring tapes that come in both metric and imperial systems because sometimes patterns only share information in the imperial system. So I like to have a translation, let's say, available. I am terrible at any kind of estimations, whether it's time, distances, length. I am terrible at estimating things, so I always have a measuring tape on hand. I'm one of those people who doesn't know how to differentiate 5 centimeters from 10 centimeters, so measuring tape to the rescue. I always use a stitch marker to mark where I'm measuring from, but I'm one of those people who needs 2 rows and thinks they already got 5 centimeters. So I'm always measuring things to track my progress. Tape measure, pretty self-explanatory, I'd say. I just have two, and they're the pretty basic ones. Polka dot pattern, really cute, and another one that is right over there. But yeah, there are many fancy ones out there, but mine are just from my craft store. Now, since we're talking about basic things, let's talk about tapestry needle. For a long time, I would say my favorite tapestry needle was this one with the bent tip. I hope you can see. But I don't really like this anymore. For a while now, I've been really reaching for this really small one with a straight tip. What I really like about this is I usually knit with fingering weight yarn, sometimes DK, but most of the time fingering weight, sometimes paired with mohair, sometimes not. So I really like this one I have because it's really thin. The eye of the needle is also kind of like the same thickness as the body of my tapestry needle, so I really like that. I would love if I could find really thin needles like this one with a bent tip, but so far I've never came across these needles. I really like the bent tip because it makes it easier to go into a stitch when I'm weaving in my ends, but at the same time, a thin needle, I think it's maybe more important if I'm working with fingering weight yarn. So yeah, I have both, but lately I've been reaching for the straight one with a thinner body way more than the curved one. So this is my favorite tapestry needle, at least for now. And the last thing I wanted to show you guys today is my lifeline. I didn't know what this thing was made of, so I checked online before recording. And this is, well, the label says crochet essentials 100% cotton. So I don't know if this is a crochet thread, what this is, but it's this thing here. And I got in this really bright yellow that I think has a minimal chance of me ever knitting with this color, so it's really nice for a lifeline to stand out. It makes things so much easier to spot where my lifeline is. Nothing special, just works really well. I like to experiment a lot with my knitting, so sometimes I add a lifeline to make it easier to rip back if I did something wrong. If I'm working on a complicated lace design, I every now and then add a lifeline to same purpose, and that's it. This is my lifeline. Not really a tool, but in my opinion a very useful thing for my knitting life. And those are the knitting tools that stuck with me, not because they are perfect, but because they fit the way I knit right now. I would love to know if you have tools you swear by or tools everyone else loves that just never worked for you. Feel free to share, disagree, or add your own favorites in the comments. That's honestly my favorite part of making these videos. And if you disagree, just please be kind in the comments, okay? If you enjoyed today's video, you're very welcome to subscribe and give this video a like if you feel like it. I share new podcast episodes here on the channel every 2 weeks with other knitting related videos in between. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!